3 o'clock Tuesday afternoon. Welcome into the Postgame show. I'm Elijah Campbell. No Jay Phillips again today. Still on vacation. Be out the rest of the week. Yesterday we had Mike Uva, and today we are exchanging mics. We have Mike Gillespie on with me once again. Fun time on Friday. Looking forward to it again.
Hello.
Mike, how we doing? I see he's trying to plug in the headphones. Yesterday we started the show.
Sorry, I was talking to your boss for a second.
Terry interfering. Interference. That's 5 yards.
Yep.
Automatic first down.
I was greasing him up. I'm like, I need a job. I need a full-time job.
You're like, I need more of these.
Hello. Yeah.
I like eating, and I like when the lights in my house are on.
Yeah, right. Exactly. I like being able to pay my water bill. Those are good things.
I like being able to do the basic functions of living.
Yes.
Paying mortgages, really tight.
100%.
Eating food, tight. Yeah, making sure that you have air conditioning in the middle of a South Carolina summer.
Yes.
Even cooler.
Always
no pun
good.
intended. Yes.
I wish that there was an air conditioning company that we could plug right now.
I know. I see. I had. Well, they're for the station, yes, and their ads will come on, but unless they pay me personally, I mean, no free pub here. All right. There's a select few companies I will freely plug. Yeah. My loyalty is bought, buddy, not earned.
All right. Who's on the list? Chipotle? Is that one?
Nah, I don't think I'd free plug Chipotle.
No, I would.
I do like Chipotle. I am a big Chipotle burrito guy, though.
Yeah.
In all honesty, big Chipotle burrito guy. I would probably free plug. I would Taco Bell, but they make so much money they don't need it anyway.
They don't need it.
They don't need it.
The inventor of Taco Bell, his last name was legitimately Bell. Did you know that?
I did not.
No. You learned something
But
new
that makes a ton of sense.
I know. And then you're like, why? What does a Bell and a taco have in common? Well, there you go. His last name was Bell. That's how they got it.
And if they brought back the Taco Bell Chihuahua as a spokesperson, then maybe I would freely plug Taco Bell.
100%.
Yeah, I'd probably do that.
Yeah.
But man,
it's nice to see you again.
It's good to see you too.
This was, you and I were texting on Friday. We were like, we need to do this more often because I thought we had a great show.
Oh, it was awesome. That flew by. We end the show and you're like, wow, like that's a fast 3 hours.
I've worked in sports TV for 20 years, and I never, ever, 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 I don't do this very often, I swear. I never used to go back and watch my stuff. Like, when you first get in the business, I think you always do. You listen to your stuff. You go back and you watch it. You're like, how did I do? Blah, blah, blah. Over time, you're like, I don't care. I went back Friday night, and I was like, that's a great show. I need to listen to that again. And it was fun. It was fun to go back and listen. My wife even listened. It was cool. So,
Good.
Thank you. It's nice to be back.
And we're going to do it again today. 3 to 6. Got a whole lot to talk about. A lot of South Carolina-Clemson scheduling news, question mark. Something I didn't think we would have going into today. Lamont Paris spoke yesterday for a little bit, and there's some decent Gamecock basketball news. Excited to get into that a little bit. Talked a lot about South Carolina's defense yesterday, but if we're being honest with ourselves, one of the biggest question marks is special teams. We're going to break that down a little bit as well, but we'll go ahead and start into really what was one of the bigger news items of the day, and that was a report. It was, I want to say it was brought on, I don't know who broke it first, but I saw it on TigerNet.
Yeah,
the article you sent me was on TigerNet. Yeah. I found it on Greenville Online today, and we'll go ahead and read a little bit of it, and pretty much the news itself, as my computer is slowly loading. Here it is. Clemson University rejected an opportunity to move its football program's home game against South Carolina on Saturday, November 30th to Friday, November 29th, according to Pickens County Court documents. This is from Greenville Online. In an email dated May 7th of 2024 from ACC Senior Associate Football Commissioner Michael Strickland to Clemson Athletic Director Graham Neff, Strickland stated Clemson, quote, refused to move its home game versus South Carolina to the day after Thanksgiving, despite ESPN and the ACC mutually requesting it. And this is a direct quote from the email itself. Quote, the conference office is disappointed in Clemson University's lack of cooperation on this matter. As all ACC members know, it is incumbent upon the ACC and its institutions to work in good faith with ESPN on football scheduling issues. This cooperation maximizes the value of our relationship with our media partner and strengthens our collective future. Clemson's decision not to do so in this instance is harmful toward that goal. Found that to be really interesting as to why you would deny it. I've been trying to kind of grasp my brain around that, and you look through a lot of the comments maybe on Twitter, which I know is usually a cesspool for just fantastic commentary.
Yeah, for sure.
But when you looked at the comments, a lot of them was like, "Oh, good, good for Clemson for not taking the offer."
Lots of traditionalists.
Exactly. So, which is why today, our poll question at 1075 The Game on Twitter: would you be open to the idea of the Carolina-Clemson football game being played on Black Friday in prime time? We have 117 votes, so we're gaining some sample size here, but 71.8% say yes, 21.4% say no, and 6.8% are indifferent.
That's surprising to me. So 70% are saying yes, they would be open to seeing Carolina and Clemson be played on Black Friday.
Yep.
Wow.
A good almost 3/4 of our voting populace here. And I would vote yes. Now, granted, I've been in this market for not even 2 full years, and the Carolina-Clemson rivalry to me might mean different than other people, but I don't see why you wouldn't. From a marketing standpoint, it feels like a really good opportunity to showcase the rivalry, right? It gets to be standalone. There's significantly more games played.
Yes.
On that Saturday. So I'm really trying to weigh out, pros and cons of moving the game to Black Friday. And if you look at what is being played this year on that day after Thanksgiving.
Friday.
You got Minnesota at Wisconsin, noon on CBS.
Yep.
Oklahoma State at Colorado, noon on ABC.
Those two are not great matchups.
Not ideal.
No.
Because you don't know what Minnesota is going to be. Wisconsin is going to be
who cares?
Better, but
like Colorado rates because prime. But
and who knows where they are at that point of the season?
Right.
Right. And who knows exactly how much Oklahoma State's going to get from Ollie Gordon, who we'll cover later on in the show. Got in a little bit of legal trouble, and he's the best player in the Big 12. So who knows what Oklahoma State or Colorado are going to be at this point in the season. The Egg Bowl, Mississippi State at Ole Miss, 3:30 on ABC. Georgia Tech versus Georgia, 7:30 on ABC.
Okay, which, by the way, I got to stop you right there.
Yes.
Because that game was one of the games that they were trying to push from Saturday to Friday. They ultimately did that. So when this news when the conversations first started happening, they went to 2 schools. They went to Clemson, they went to Georgia Tech, and they said, would either one of you be interested in moving your game from Saturday to Friday? I believe they favored Clemson. From everything that I know about that situation, the people that I've talked to at ESPN, they favored Clemson for a lot of reasons, right? They wanted Clemson, national brand, South Carolina, national brand, right? They wanted that old rivalry game to be played in primetime Friday night, right? Okay, that all makes sense. The other reason why is because Georgia and Georgia Tech, right? That was the other school. They went to Georgia Tech, which I already said. They wanted Georgia Tech to be played on Saturday against Michigan, Ohio State. Michigan, Ohio State is going to rate better than anything that day on that Saturday. Okay?
It'll probably be the highest rated game in college football all year long.
They wanted to put on ESPN a crappy game against Ohio State and Michigan because everything's going to, Ohio State, Michigan's going to rate really well. Anything opposed to that is not going to rate great. So you might as well put on some garbage at noon. Okay, that garbage is Georgia Tech.
Televised bullying.
Georgia's going to win by 1,000. Okay, it's not going to be competitive. So they didn't want Carolina-Clemson to potentially have to go up against Michigan, Ohio State. That makes a lot of sense. Now, from Clemson's perspective, I kind of get it, but again, for me, any chance to be on national television kind of alone, right? Because there's not a whole lot of competition that Friday night. So you have the space alone. To me, that works. And you look at the brands that have done it, right? Florida State did it 2 years ago. Does Florida State as a brand need to get any bigger than they already are? No, it's a good way to showcase to recruits that, hey, look at our home atmosphere under the lights. It's super, super cool. We're being played on Friday night. You can watch it with your family. Everyone's in town. I think from Clemson's perspective, though, they were afraid that the students weren't going to get back in time. And I know that I think that's kind of a myth, though, because I think
so too.
in a huge rivalry game, I think the students are going to come back for it. Yeah. But I think they were afraid ticket sales were going to go down. There wasn't going to be as much of a fierce home atmosphere as you would get on a Saturday night. But I think it's just the contrary, man. I think it pumps people up, right? It gets people talking about that rivalry game, right? It's on a Friday this year. Like, that's kind of crazy. I mean, look, we're talking about the Carolina-Clemson rivalry in freaking July.
We are.
That doesn't happen that often, right? So, I mean, it gets people talking about it. But again, a lot of this stuff, it's going to be interesting to see how ESPN kind of navigates this, because there are going to be a lot of unhappy schools, right, with their time slots, because it's crowded, man. And the other part about this that I think is important for the average person who doesn't really understand the TV rights and everything. It's important to remember that the Pac-12 no longer exists, okay? So remember, like, the Pac-12 had those Friday night games, right? And so all of a sudden, those Pac-12 Friday night games go, poof, that's no longer a thing.
Yep.
So ESPN is scrambling. They have to figure out, content plans for those Friday night games. And so that's why you see, hey, Clemson, would you be interested in moving your game from Saturday to Friday? We need the inventory for Friday night.
And it's not like this is just a normal Friday night, right? In the middle of September.
Right.
I mean, it's Black Friday. There's always been games played on Black Friday, especially really big college football games. And usually the last Saturday of the regular season, there's a lot of implications on who gets to go to championship games. Now that we have a 12-team playoff, there's going to be more teams that are going to need to win these games against their big rivals, because it's rivalry week across the board.
Yeah.
And even, like in that night slot, like what Georgia and Georgia Tech will be competing against in that 7:30 slot is on Fox. Utah is playing at Central Florida.
And that's a great matchup.
Yeah, historical Big 12 rivalry.
That's great.
But
right. But I mean, still, that's a good. I think that's a decent matchup. I would watch that over Georgia Tech, Georgia.
Yeah, but I think South Carolina-Clemson absolutely clobbers it in ratings.
I think so too.
It's a really good opportunity, and it's not just. I would have some, I guess, hesitation scheduling regular Friday night football games from the month of September to mid-November, right? But this is not just any regular Friday. There have always been games, like I said, like during this time slot on this specific day. This really just puts you in the spotlight, because potentially you're having, if it was anything like last year, South Carolina's either playing for a bowl, or like 2 years ago, Clemson was playing for a spot in the college football playoff. With an expanded playoff, Clemson can very well be playing for a spot in the college football playoff. And being able to do that in prime time is really a big opportunity, not just for both teams, but for the rivalry as a whole, and for the sport, and for your league, and for the ACC. I think Clemson turning it down hurts the ACC, which is really counterintuitive to what Clemson's trying to do with their conference and the revenue they're bringing in. We'll hit that angle on the other side. We'll take your thoughts to you, 803-404-6100 to weigh in, call, or text on the Firehouse Subs text line. What does it mean for Clemson to turn down the opportunity for this game to be on Black Friday as opposed to the Saturday after Thanksgiving? And what exactly does it mean for the ACC moving forward? We'll tackle that as the postgame show. Elijah Campbell, Mike Gillespie here for Jay Phillips continues. Clemson reportedly turning down the opportunity to make the Carolina-Clemson game a Black Friday game this year. A lot of people weighing in on Twitter at 1075 The Game and on our text line 803-404-6100, the Firehouse Subs text line. Taking your thoughts all day on this. We'll hit on this for a little bit. We have some Gamecock baseball transfer portal news we're going to get to in just a little bit. But we'll go ahead and read our first text of the day. This is from Reg. Reg says Friday is usually the Egg Bowl. Still think it's a cool idea to give us something unique. The rivalry heritage goes back to Big Thursday. I would like something different.
Different from Saturday or different from Friday? What are we talking about?
The gist I get is maybe from Saturday, like maybe he doesn't mind mixing it up. And I feel like that actually might end up being the consensus here, is they don't mind like mixing it up a little bit.
Sure. I would be interested to know if it was reversed, if South Carolina, because, you know, obviously our audience is mostly Carolina fans. I would want to know if Carolina had turned down the opportunity, right? Mm-hmm. Would fans be like, yes, perfect move. Of course, we need to leave it on Saturday. But, like, maybe it's because Clemson turned it down and
they will zig when they zag.
Yeah. I don't know. Just a thought. I do think, though, that there's a lot more positive to be had moving that game to Friday than keeping it Saturday. Saturday's just a crowded space, man. I mean,
it is. It's a loaded slate.
It's just incredible. I mean, you got, you know, Texas, the Texas A&M too. That's not one we've talked about. Florida State, which has prime time written all over it. You know, Auburn, Alabama. Where in the heck do you put that game on Saturday? And then, you know, we've already talked about Ohio State and Michigan. That's going to be the highest rated thing of the day. Like, okay, so you're trying to fit in, you know, and Clemson doesn't. They're in a position where they don't have to sell their brand at this point, right? Like Dabo has done that. They say what you will about Clemson. They've done a great job doing that. You know, South Carolina, on the other hand, I think it would be extremely beneficial for them to be able to play on a Friday night. I was trying to, honestly, man, I can't remember the last time Carolina did not play on a Saturday. And the only thing that I could come up with, there were two. One was 2016 against Vanderbilt. Mm-hmm. That was in Nashville. Was it,
that was opening game, right?
Yeah, it was. That was Will Muschamp's first game. God rest his soul. And I think was it Elliott Fry? I think Elliott Fry hit the game-winning field goal from like 190 yards away. And that thing, like, he belted it, man.
That was one of the beginning of the ends of the Derek Mason era.
Yes, it was. But that game was on a Thursday night in Nashville. And then there was another one a couple years ago. You know, the game was supposed to be played on a Saturday against Georgia at Williams-Brice. Got pushed to Sunday because of a hurricane.
Yes.
Those were the only two that I could, you know, obviously during the Spurrier era, they used to open the season South Carolina used to open the season every year on a Thursday night.
Because they opened the SEC Network on a Thursday. That was
against Texas A&M.
Yeah, the Kenny Trill game.
Yeah, we'd like to forget about that.
Pretend it didn't happen.
Yeah, and set it on fire and never talk about it again. But yeah, I mean, honestly, like I think it's a great move. I really do, and I think schools are going to have to get really creative, you know, moving forward in this very crowded SEC that we have now.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, look. The crowding of games is really, for me, the biggest reason why. Just make this stand alone as much as possible. And when you look at just the competition of what you're going to have that night, it's a no-brainer.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, from a real football standpoint, Utah Central Florida will be a good football game.
Sure.
But from a brand standpoint, I mean, if you take that Georgia Tech, Georgia slot, you're going to draw a ton of eyeballs. Yeah. Ultimately, that's where a lot of the business behind college athletics is how can you draw more eyeballs to your product. That does a really good job of doing that, and it's going to be really good for the ACC. As we know, the ACC has a little bit of a harder time coming with, I guess, TV revenue, and their deal is not as lucrative as the SEC's, nor is it remotely close, or the Big Tens, and that's kind of the big issue. One of the reasons why Clemson and Florida State are in a court battle with the ACC to get out of their grant of rights. Yep. And if that's the case, if you're Clemson, why wouldn't you go the extra mile or cooperate with the conference to maybe help draw more eyeballs and maybe help get more value for the TV deal you have in place right now?
So to me, it just speaks to the fact that this, like Clemson moving on from the ACC is already a done deal. right?
Like, they're going to try to.
They are like, no, it's not. There's no official contract yet that says Clemson, but Clemson is getting out of their deal. They don't care how the ACC feels about things anymore. It's a soured relationship.
We'll just have to wait till 2036 when it expires.
Maybe. I doubt that they'll have to wait that long. I think they'll be able to get out of it. I think the two sides will be able to negotiate something, and Clemson will be free to do what they please. But, I mean, look, man, I don't think that either side wants to make the other happy at this point. And, I was talking to a buddy of mine this morning who works for ESPN, and I was like, Clemson, honestly, at this point, I wouldn't be surprised if they just said no just to be contrarian to what the ACC wants, just like, hey, no, we're good. We're not going to do anything that you say. We're good. We're fine. You're not meeting us halfway on the grant of rights. We're good. We're not going to go any extra mile or extra foot to help you guys out.
Which is petulant, because that would help them out too in turn. Yeah, I feel like it's it's a kind of a counterintuitive.
I get that.
You're stuck in this league. You're stuck in it until you can work your way through the legal system, which, as we know, works at the speed of smell.
Right.
It's not exactly a fast-moving process, and you're going to be in it for a long time. Even if you get out of this deal, it's not going to be in the next couple of years. So if you can't be with the one you love, you better love the one you're with, because you're in it for a while, right?
Yeah. I see that point. I guess I just, again, to me, I just don't think that Clemson really feels like they're in a position to have to do that, right? They're like, we're Clemson. We have a national brand. People already love us. Like, it's fine. We're not going to do anything to meet the ACC halfway. I think it's a dumb move on their part. I think any school. Look, they've gone to massive brands. We brought up Florida State a couple years ago. They had Florida State on a Friday night. Traditionally, that's been, a power, football game on a Saturday, that rivalry Saturday. They moved it to Friday. Florida State was great with that. Florida was great with that. The athletics department at Florida was like, heck yeah, this is great. There's a little competition on that Friday night window. Perfect. We get to show our awful brand of football. That's perfect. In front of a nationally televised audience. Great. But at least it gets that brand out there. And for, Clemson, I just don't feel like they feel like they've got to do that, which is a little unfortunate because, again, I think any school, any program can benefit by having those nationally televised games to themselves.
Exactly. And your brand's going to benefit. And look, I know when Clemson if they are able to get out of the ACC here in 6, 7, 8 years, or when the grant of rights deal expires, I don't think you're going to be able to go to the SEC. I don't think you're going to be able to go to the Big Ten. And we're going to get into this later on in the show, too. There are a lot of issues with the sheer number of conferences we have, or teams in certain conferences right now. We're going to get into this later. The Big Ten has 18 teams. You look at the standings on the internet, on ESPN.com, and the standings do look like a CVS receipt.
Yeah, you have to.
It is it's incredibly long.
Yeah.
And you're not going to have
15% off at the bottom.
The nightmare scenario is that Big Ten championship game includes Iowa this year.
Yeah.
And you know what's really possible? The Big Ten championship game, including Iowa. Because you know who Iowa doesn't have to play? More than one of the top 5 teams in the conference. That's not them. That's a real possibility. And instead of getting the sexy Ohio State-Oregon matchup, or Michigan-Oregon matchup, or Penn State and Southern Cal matchup in the Big Ten championship game, you might get stuck with Ohio State and Iowa. Because you have too many damn teams in your conference to determine the 2 best teams based on standing. Shoot, Rutgers doesn't play any of the top 5 teams. And if they're improved and they're at 7-2, they're playing in a conference title game. With all the traveling expenditures you're going to have to add to your yearly budget because you are all over the map now, are you going to be making enough money to make it worth it? Is you're going to make the product better to make it worth it? And I guarantee you the SEC is looking at that right now, and they might be closed. They might be full. They might be at capacity once they realize it's not going to be what the Big Ten thought it was going to be when they first started this whole realignment domino. I think that's one thing we're going to have to really take into consideration. And if you're Clemson and you're not going to be able to get into either of those, what's the point of getting out? Are you going to be independent? I don't know. It's going to be tough, but we'll get into that. We'll continue this conversation too. Get into more of your text, 803-404-6100. We'll get into a whole lot more of this as for the first hour. Clemson, South Carolina. Are you open to the idea of them playing on Black Friday? We'll keep discussing this as the post-game show continues. Take a second here of my friends over at Columbia Secret for Weight Loss. Look, great coaching does well on the football field. And for me, it did even better when it came to my journey to losing some extra pounds. Paul Grant and Shaylin over at Columbia Secret for Weight Loss were fantastic with not only helping me get into a groove and an established habit, eating habit specifically, but they also help in terms of the amount of exercise I need with everything that I need to do on a weekly basis with my schedule and work with me personally to be able to get me to reach my weight loss goal. They do it, most importantly, without any shots, without any pills, without any crazy changes, but enough to help me reach my goal and to help me learn the secret of losing up to a pound of unhealthy fat per day. If that sounds good to you, give them a call, 803-824-4210. Again, 803-824-4210. Results may vary. Continuing our discussion here in the first hour of the post-game show, Clemson, South Carolina. not going to be a Black Friday game. Clemson did not give the green light for that to be played. I'm Elijah Campbell here with Mike Gillespie filling in for Jay right now. We're talking about this here in the first hour. 803-404-6100. Cale Wilson on his first official day here with Cumulus. Cale.
Wait a second. This is his first day? So this is our intern. Well, this is your intern. I don't work here full time, but this is your intern.
Technically, on paper, we do not have interns.
Oh.
He is a part-timer, and he does hang out in the studio with us.
Well,
so he hangs out in the studio
welcome, part-timer. That's awesome. I don't know which one I'd rather be called, a part-timer or an intern.
Thank you guys for letting me be here. I'm excited.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It's funny, we were talking off air, and I was like, are interns, part-timers allowed to be on the air? And Elijah was like, sure. Like, great. So here we are. So now we have 3 voices that you have to listen to.
And now, here for the segment, we'll have Cale join us. Just to, I'll go ahead and ask you, Cale, would you be open to South Carolina-Clemson being on Black Friday? Because that's our whole topic here for the first hour, getting everybody's opinions here, but would you be open to the idea? I guess that's how I phrased it on Twitter.
So growing up as a kid that's watched South Carolina football my entire life, I was used to the game being played on a Saturday. Yeah. So when that idea first came to my mind, I was against it. But then I started to think about all the other games that would be on that Saturday and all the other games that would be on that Friday. And I kind of thought, you know what, as you guys were talking about before you went to the last break, this could be very beneficial to the brand for South Carolina. Clemson, I guess, already has that recognition. Yeah. Unfortunately, with the success that they've had, so I guess that's just, I guess you could say Clemson doesn't really need that exposure anymore. And so I guess that's kind of why they probably were against the idea. And since it's just been played on a Saturday for so long.
Yeah, it's interesting to me, man. Like, when you look at it, you almost hope that they, have a good relationship with ESPN so that ESPN can kind of tell them, like, hey, look, if you don't accept this game on Friday, you're going to have to play at noon on that Saturday. So which one would you rather have? Would you rather play at noon that Saturday, or would you rather play in prime time that Friday night? Because when you look at the loaded slate, the only place that we can put you is high noon, 12 p.m., and you're going to be against, Ohio State, Michigan. That stinks. It's going to be slate. It's going to be noon. Like, your fans aren't going to get fired up for a noon kickoff, against South Carolina. Like, it just doesn't have the same ring. Obviously, Carolina-Clemson always sells well, but a Carolina-Clemson night game, very different feel than, a noon kickoff when people are still waking up, at 1 p.m., at least. God, man, when I was in college, those noon football games down at UF, people would, it's just so funny. Like, by halftime, you start seeing the students file in, and you're like, oh, there you are. It's like by, 1:30 in the afternoon, like, all right, thanks for joining us.
That's getting up early for them.
Yeah, exactly.
That's an earlier start for them.
No,
for
exactly.
normal people.
Yeah.
Yes. Games are not kind to the student body.
What's that?
Noon games are not kind to the student body.
I don't think they're kind for anybody. except for maybe people in their 80s, who, have to go to bed by 8 p.m. But other than that, man, at 12 p.m., especially if you're covering it, or you're in the the east stands, that always stinks too, because you're looking in the sun the whole time, and it's just I don't know. To me, if I'm Clemson, I'm like, okay, give us our options. Is it 7 or 7:30 on that Friday night? Or are we going to get stuck with that noon kick Saturday? And if you're telling us it's going to be that noon kick Saturday, let's just go ahead and push it to Friday.
And that's what some of the response we've gotten to. Ryan on Twitter commented, said if it's a guaranteed night game, sure. And really, that's pretty much what it would do. If you're playing on Black Friday, you're playing at night, you're playing on that slot that Georgia Tech and Georgia are going to play in this year. And I'm a sucker for a good primetime game, man. Anytime you can get yourself in terms of, and I'm not even just talking just money here, right? If we're talking about program exposure, it's always great for your program to be in a standalone game. Or in this case, you're competing, in a staggered kickoff time with Utah at UCF, which might have some Big 12 implication towards the end of the year. But honestly, Carolina-Clemson's going to do a lot better than that on a national stage because SEC versus ACC, it's just really good for the program. And I think when you bury it on a Saturday, which we don't know for sure it's going to be a noon game, but probably. I think you might be up against Ohio State and Michigan, and you just don't want that. You don't want that from a conference standpoint, and because Ohio State, Michigan every year.
Yeah, well, and
we're the floor with everybody with ratings.
And remember, we're only saying this if you missed the top part of our program. I mean, the reason why this all came to be was because the Pac-12 is no more. You know, ESPN's contract with the Pac-12 went away because the Pac-12 itself went away, and you don't have that Friday night TV slot anymore. So ESPN had to fill it with something, right? And they're like, okay, well, what are our options here? We've already got the Egg Bowl, you know, Friday afternoon. We need something for that night slot. All right, let's see if, you know, two rivalries in between the SEC and the ACC. Let's see which one wants to do it. And Georgia Tech was on board and Clemson wasn't. And so, I mean, it's just like Saturday. I hate to, overuse this word today. I guess the word of the day is crowded, but it does seem like it's just going to be way too crowded Saturday. There's not going to be enough eyeballs on you. You already, if you're looking at the slate, you can kind of figure that Florida State is going to be later in the day. It's probably going to be a night kickoff, at Florida State, Texas A&M. I mean, that's a huge matchup. That's got to be somewhere in the afternoon. Auburn, Alabama, probably a 3:30 kick, I would assume, just based off of the feel of the conference so far. Like they left the Florida-Georgia game at 3:30. A lot of people were like, oh, that'd be perfect for, a 7:30 kickoff on ABC, but they left it at 3:30. It just feels like Auburn, Alabama is going to stay at 3:30 too. So
yeah, definitely.
So all of a sudden, right, like your windows, your options shrink, and it's like you got noon. That's it.
Yeah, pretty much. And like for something like this, also, it's a shame that you just mentioned Auburn, Alabama. Got me thinking that the game's not going to be on CBS this year.
Yes.
Which is really
very weird.
Very unfortunate.
Yeah, it's going to be very strange to hear that theme music and then see, like,
Nebraska versus Iowa.
Yeah, exactly. Like, it's good 9-3 at the end of the game, and they're like, oh, God.
Which it will be that day. I do think, Nebraska, Iowa.
Yeah.
Well, that'll be on NBC that night, but that day, noon on CBS, Minnesota at Wisconsin.
Well, here's another one. That Saturday, I think, is, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that's Notre Dame and Southern Cal that Saturday. That's a powerhouse football matchup. Like they're not going to put that at noon. That's going to be somewhere later in the day, and that's going to belong to either, however the rights deal with it. I think it's CBS is going to have to do that one, or CBS, or maybe NBC gets that.
I think it'd be whoever's the home team. The game will be in Southern Cal this year. So that might end up being
might be
Big Ten property.
CBS, I don't know. I was wondering that too. Can Peacock technically do away Notre Dame games? And I don't know. I don't know how that contract works out this year. But
out of all the teams in terms of TV contracts, the one who might have it made the best is still Notre Dame.
Yeah,
you don't have to share any of that revenue.
Yep,
you got a really nice deal, and you're always on national TV.
Yeah, 100%.
Ahead of the curve.
The problem is, though, with being an independent, especially this year, right? Like, you don't have that automatic qualifier to get into the playoff. So,
Correct.
You get, if, those top four, right, automatic qualifiers from your conference, they don't have that. So, what happens if, Notre Dame's got, let's just say, 2 losses or something, and they don't have that conference championship game to prove to the committee, hey, we belong in this thing, and then what if they leave Notre Dame out? So that's why I've always kind of been in favor of that extra game, that conference championship game, and it means more now, with this new, playoff expansion.
Mm-hmm. And before we cut for break here, Cale, obviously student at USC. One of the biggest question marks, I guess, in terms of making this a Saturday game or a Friday game as opposed to a Saturday game would be students being on break. They'll be on break anyway.
Yeah. But
do you think the change of date, if they were to play us on Black Friday, would have any, I guess, change in the amount of students that are showing up?
So the only question that I would have about that is, I think we all know that travel on a Black Friday is
not fun.
Never fun.
That's the understatement.
Yeah, for sure.
And I unfortunately, I do think it would have an impact on the amount of students that would show up. Now, since it's at Clemson this year, I don't really think that would, go against South Carolina too much, since it's going to be mostly Clemson fans at that game. However, I just think that if you were going to go to that game, if it was on a Black Friday, I feel like you would most likely have to leave on Thanksgiving, and
probably.
that would just be very difficult and very inconvenient. So I think, like, if you want more student attendance, to keep the game on a Saturday.
Wrapping up hour number 1, continuing our discussion on Clemson, or the Carolina-Clemson game not being played on Black Friday. We'll keep the conversation rolling as the first hour concludes. Would you be open to the Gamecocks and Tigers? The Palmetto Bowl being played on Black Friday as opposed to its normal Saturday slot. I think my favorite response to this so far, Mike Gillespie,
Yes.
is from CD Rounds on Twitter. He said, I voted no, but really as long as I have a turkey sandwich and some whiskey, I would be good. I think that applies to a lot of things.
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely. Well, and as long as it's, not in the morning, as long as we're not kicking this thing off at 10 a.m., I think sign me up, man. Like, it's Carolina-Clemson, right? Like, play it whenever. It's one of the best football rivalries, that you have out there. So
it is.
It's going to be intense either way.
Yeah, I got my first taste of it this past year, and I was really impressed. That was a lot of fun. The football game itself was an absolute dud.
Yeah,
of a football game.
It was.
But
not one of the better ones.
In terms of rivalry experience, that was one of my favorite ones I've gotten to experience. That was a whole lot of fun.
Yeah, no, it gets testy. I mean, like any good college football rivalry, the fans hate each other, and that's great. Yeah, it's one of the better ones that I've covered. I mean, I've covered a few of them. I mean, Carolina-Clemson, Florida State, Florida-Georgia is one of my favorites.
That's a bucket list one.
Yeah, Florida-Georgia's fun. That is, you'll bring the sunblock, drink lots of water.
They didn't call it the world's largest outdoor cocktail party for nothing.
Yeah, plenty of drinks have been consumed in Jacksonville between me and my friends. But we left that place dry for sure. But yeah, no, it's Carolina-Clemson, man. You play it whenever. It's gonna be fun. I just feel like Clemson kind of missed their mark there by having that game in prime time, on ESPN by themselves. Could have done great things for Beamer's program too. I really wonder. I hope somebody asks Shane about this, and I hope that he doesn't give the political answer, which is, play it whenever, we'll suit up and play whenever.
We'll play on the moon in the summer if that's what you want to do.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is the football guy answer.
Yeah, it is. And, Shane goes back and forth. I mean, I really like Shane a lot, as a coach, as a human. He's a great dude. I would really love to know how he truly feels about that. Whether, hey, if we go play on a Friday night, that's going to do great things for our brand. And if that's true, I would love for him to come out and say it, because it might. I just don't know. I don't know how coaches really feel about that, or if they think about that stuff that much. I think good coaches do in today's world, because you kind of have to.
It helps sell your program.
Yeah. Maybe some of the more traditional coaches don't really care, but I think that this new wave of coaches, definitely understand the media game and how it's played.
I think in terms of recruiting, it helps you a little bit too. If you're like a standalone game and you're able to showcase your environment.
Sure.
Right? Like one of the coolest things that Virginia Tech does is the Enter Sandman entrance.
Yeah. And
you really only get to see it nationally when they're playing a team like Clemson or Florida State at home, a big-time conference foe. And they're broadcasting it on ABC. I remember, I think the last time I got to watch that live, this might have been like 2016, which really tells you the downfall of the Hokie program. But it was in 2016, and Clemson was playing there, and I remember just being really excited, watching this game on a couch and just getting ready to run through a wall, because that was really cool, and that does wonders for your national recruiting efforts. If anything, it helps sell the program at just a different degree than you can anywhere else. It's really a marketing opportunity for your program and the environment you're trying to sell to prospective players.
Yeah, and honestly, Elijah, at first I was like, maybe Clemson, because again, I'm not in the TV game this year. For those of you who don't know, I'm not working at ABC Columbia anymore. Shocker. Ding, ding, ding. So I haven't followed Clemson's schedule as much as I would have in the past. So my first reaction when I saw this morning, I was like, oh, well, maybe they're already playing a Friday game this year, and they don't want to play 2 Friday games. Maybe that's it. And then, I bring up their schedule, and it's all Saturday games. And I'm like, well, that's weird. So that's not it. They literally just did not want to move this game from Saturday to Friday. That's what it comes down to. But it's weird because Clemson, for, however long, they've had to play Friday games in the past. Remember, the first time Clemson lost, a regular season game in forever was that Friday night game at Syracuse a couple years back. In the dome. It was
Remember that?
Crazy. The fans rushed the field and
all 20 Syracuse fans
on a Friday night.
on a Friday
exactly.
night.
Yeah,
all
for
20
sure.
of them. There was actually so few of them. Police were able to arrest them for getting onto the field. It was a manageable situation.
Their sentence was to eat dinosaur barbecue for a week. But yeah, I mean, so Clemson's used to playing on Friday nights. It's just I don't know. That was a weird decision this year not to move it from Saturday to Friday. Very weird.
Yesterday, Texas and Oklahoma became official members of the SEC. We'll get Mike's thoughts on that. We'll discuss the atrocity that happened in Kansas City between the U.S. men's national team and why it's a good life lesson for all involved. More in the second hour as the postgame show continues. Hour number 2 of the postgame show. I'm Elijah Campbell. Mike Gillespie in today for Jay Phillips, who is still enjoying his vacation. I think he is.
I'm sure he is.
The last time I talked to him,
Kale tried to call him earlier and he didn't pick up, so I feel like that's a good sign.
That is a good sign.
When you're not picking up phone calls, it's
either a good or a bad sign.
I think you're probably enjoying your vacay. You know,
you're either enjoying it or you're enjoying it too much.
Maybe
one of the two.
It's not a bad thing.
The last time I talked to him was about last night's U.S. men's national team game. He was not very pleased. We get into that a little more down the line because there actually is a very positive, not positive, it is a life lesson that you could learn from watching that game last night. We'll get into that. It was a national embarrassment. But yesterday, Mike, you and I hit on this. This is pretty much the theme of our show yesterday was Texas and Oklahoma officially getting admitted into the SEC. Mm-hmm. You don't have to carry on the facade anymore that they're not. They can finally put SEC on the field, on the basketball court, put the emblems in the hallways of the athletic department. It is now for real. And haven't got a chance to talk to you about this yet since you've been in. Now that it's official, what are, I guess, some of your initial thoughts? What should Texas and Oklahoma fans know before coming into this great league?
Offensive line and defensive line play are much different. In the words of the great Buddy Pugh, South Carolina State's old head football coach, got a bunch of man children on the offensive and defensive lines. Yeah, he once said that about the Florida Gators when they had to play him. No, they actually didn't play him. They played UCF, and UCF beat Florida the year before. And he was saying that, Florida had a bunch of man children on the offensive and defensive lines. So, yeah, that's what I would say. Get ready. Every week's a battle. You're not playing, Oklahoma State anymore. No offense to Oklahoma State, quality program, but they're not LSU and they're not Georgia and they're not Bama. So, I think that's first and foremost. Get ready for a lot of hate. They do it a little differently.
The horns down is going to be
everywhere. Yep. Over the years, I've definitely seen my fair share of fake chomping in my face as a Florida guy. So there's going to be a lot of that, and just take it. God, it's interesting, man. Like both of those programs are very different. Texas has a very high opinion of themselves.
Even when they're not very good.
Yes. They remind me a little bit of Florida in a way. Some people that I went to school with, some people in their athletics building. I could say that. They feel like they're better maybe sometimes than they actually are. Texas, there's a guy who runs Texas Unfiltered, good dude, but he put out a video the other day that was, talking about how, bring the horns down, signs on, we're ready for it. I don't think they are. I think they've got some pretty fragile egos, and I don't think they're ready for the amount of hate that's going to come their way. I don't know if you knew this, but something I read yesterday, this kind of got sort of, I guess, lost in the shuffle, but this is pretty interesting. I did not know that the SEC actually tried to get Texas back in 1992. I had no idea that was a thing, but under Texas state law, literally this was a law like 30 years ago that if Texas joined the SEC, Texas A&M would have to join the SEC as well. Right? So it was a package deal, right?
Interesting.
Right. And so in 92, the SEC was all on board to, give Texas the seal of approval. Here you go, enter into the SEC, but they didn't want Texas A&M. And so they would have had to have broken Texas state law in order to do so. So they went with Arkansas, South Carolina, so the story goes, I had no idea until this ESPN article that came out yesterday, but very, very interesting. That's that this has, because like you think about it and you're like, oh man, Texas A&M joined, 12 years ago, right? So I guess, Texas just really hasn't been on the SEC's radar until now, but no, that's not true. Like the SEC has wanted Texas for the last 30 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's fascinating.
I know.
And since the, I guess, expansion 92, there have only been 4 more teams added since with A&M, Missouri, now Texas and Oklahoma.
And none of them have won an SEC football championship. Is that correct? I believe that's correct.
Only Missouri has gone. They went the first 2 years.
South Carolina went as well.
South Carolina went. Yeah, South Carolina went.
And
Arkansas has been
2010.
Arkansas has been a couple times. Yeah.
Arkansas went in was that the last time? 06 when they lost to Florida, I think that might have been the last time.
Yeah, I think so.
But none of them have won.
Yeah.
Which is kind of interesting, though none of them are Texas and, no offense, Texas and Oklahoma are just kind of on a different stratosphere than any of, I think, those 4 schools, including Texas A&M.
Because they've won national championships.
They've won national championships, and they have money to burn.
They significantly have money to burn. And a part of expansion is making sure that teams fit into your conference, right? And yesterday on the SEC Network, there was a whole bunch of coverage, and Greg Sankey, the commissioner of the SEC, sat down with the crew there, and he was kind of asked about how to make sure that these teams fit to be able to add into their conference.
It does, and it goes back to an athletic director's conversation. Scott Strickland at Florida, I think we were talking generally about potential new members years ago, and he said you need to apply the "it just means more" test. So on a campus and in an athletic department in a university, does what they do as an athletic program meet that kind of expectation that we have?
Yeah.
And obviously they do, and I had been told a number of people on Friday when I toured this footprint, I think we've exceeded that number. It's interesting to travel the country, and I hear from fans of the University of Texas, University of Oklahoma about their excitement, but I was on an airplane in Syracuse, New York 2 weeks ago with a Gator fan and a Georgia fan saying that they're excited about the future because they both play Texas this year. So I think it's the reflection of meeting that excitement test.
And if you apply the "it just means more" test, I mean, certainly with the way Texas has spent money on football in the last 2 decades, you can certainly tell that it means more. And if they're following the Texas A&M of "it just means more" in your football program, it's spending a lot of money even if it doesn't translate to a ton of wins because the passion for the sport's there. Yeah,
and the eyeballs, right? So that's why you see these crazy new media deals with the SEC and ABC. The one thing I don't like about it, again, it's that sort of like Texas attitude. I can't remember who it was. Was it one of their players? Maybe came out and said like every week is going to be like
they'll be the best or be the biggest game of their schedule.
It's going to be the Super Bowl, right? Every time they play Texas, and I'm like, all right,
this year I'll give it to them. I'll give it to them this year.
Yeah, it should. I mean, it's big, but I mean, like. Florida LSU is a big game. South Carolina-Clemson. South Carolina, when they play, not that they play Georgia this year, which is a travesty, but in years past, right? Like South Carolina-Georgia, like that was a Super Bowl-esque game. It's not just Texas now coming into the league and it's like, oh, wow, we have football teams to play now. It's like this has existed for a long time. Like the SEC's been pretty darn good at football. I get it. It's a national powerhouse, but let's not act like we don't have, crazy good powerhouses in the sport, in the SEC. Like, I don't know, Alabama, right? Which is, last time I checked, won more national titles than Texas.
Certainly. But in terms of who's better in the last few years, by few, I mean one. and better in the last year. I think this Texas team is going to play in Atlanta
I think
in December.
So too.
I think that's that's a top 5 team, and I think Ewers mostly was meaning for this season, but normally they wouldn't be. I mean, if you're talking about just historic brands in this conference, there may be 7, 6, 7. Oklahoma actually is a better historic brand than Texas is.
So with the addition of Texas, I think 8 teams in the SEC have now won national titles in the last 30 years. I think 8 brands. See
Texas,
if we can
OU. That's a good question. Yeah,
Texas, Alabama, Florida, OU, Auburn, LSU,
Tennessee, and 98 for the 30 years.
Oh, that's so long ago.
Yeah, I was 3 years old.
Poor Tennessee.
I was 3 years old.
I'm sorry. I have to give you so much crap for that.
But
I just love doing it as a Florida grad, though. It's like,
because they got
every year they're just like, this is our year, and then they get through 6 games.
I'm telling you,
we're 4-2 now.
One of the best drinking games you can play on Twitter is finding if you just search "feels like '98,"
oh yeah,
it's Vol Twitter.
Yeah.
And how many times you can see that, take a shot for every time you see that, you might not live to scroll more than 30 minutes.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hope springs eternal.
Who else?
I want to say that's it, right? Might be missing out.
Is that it? We got 8. 8. Was that 8? That might have been 8. Anyway, so yeah, I mean, like the brands exist, you know. It's not like, but I get it, right? Like everything's bigger in Texas, you know. But we'll see. We'll see how they do. I mean, look, they got to play Georgia. They got to play Florida this year. I mean, I don't know how Florida's going to really be. But I mean, that Georgia-Texas matchup, man, I mean, that's going to be two powerhouses, man. Like, oh my God.
Massive.
Yeah, that's a huge game.
Massive. And
yeah.
honestly, Texas drew a better end of the deal in terms of scheduling because they only, in terms of playing Georgia, Ole Miss, non-Texas and OU teams.
Yeah.
The best in the conference are going to be Georgia, Alabama, Ole Miss, Missouri, LSU. We'll take those 5, right?
Sure.
Texas only has to play one of those 5,
That's
and
nice.
they get them at home.
That's nice.
Oklahoma plays 4 of them, and 3 of them are on the road.
Yeah, and then Florida plays 4 of them, and they're all in November. Is that right?
I think so.
Or something like that. But yeah, I've looked at that schedule so many times that it's just absolutely nauseating.
It's nasty.
I don't know.
Nasty work.
Well, see, and that's what I was going to say too. Like if you're, if you're Scott Strickland.
Yeah, you're right. All in November.
Greg Sankey said, Scott Strickland, when we were talking about expansion, he said, well, you better, bring in big brands. I'm paraphrasing here, but
right.
And I'm thinking to myself, man, be careful what you wish for, because a lot of people down in Florida think that you and Billy Napier are connected. So the future of Billy Napier is the future of Scott Strickland, the athletics director. And if Florida finishes 4-8,
which is very possible.
I don't know if Billy Napier survives, so I don't know if Scott Strickland survives. So it's interesting that Scott would say that. Of course, this was a couple years back. Little did he know that, like
the nosedive
4 years later, 3 years or whatever it is. Yeah, exactly. Like they'd be playing, LSU, Georgia, Texas, like all back to back in November. I thought that was kind of interesting from those comments that Sankey made.
And one of the things we'll get into as well, because with the addition of Texas and Oklahoma, you're now going from 14 teams in your league to 16, and you're going to have to start dealing with being a mega conference. And when we get back from the other side of the break, we'll hear Greg Sankey's thoughts on making it work with 16. What's the future of conference scheduling and being able to adequately schedule in a big league to adequately crown a champion. The Big Ten's about to run into an issue with that. We'll discuss that and a whole lot more as the postgame show rolls on. Texas and Oklahoma are one day into their SEC membership, making the SEC membership go from 14 to 16. And the more I think about it, the more I think they're getting dangerously close to making some issues with your schedule because you're going to have to adjust.
Mm-hmm.
Mike Gillespie here with me and for Jay Phillips. Mike, what do you think of the 16 teams in the conference right now? And as it's currently constructed, you're only playing about 8 conference games.
Mm-hmm.
Have you ever thought about maybe like the 9-game schedule or maybe the 10? I think even a 10-game schedule isn't absurd. If you grow the conference to where it is right now, I think you kind of have to really consider playing 10 conference games a year to get an accurate champion or at least 2 accurate teams into Atlanta in December.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if coaches will ever go for that. I'm not sure. Publicly, they'll say, yeah, bring it on. I don't know if that's something that they would really want. First and foremost, I loved the fact that we got rid of divisions. Okay, I think that was a necessary component to expanding to 16 teams, right? Like, okay, so you no longer have the champion of the East against the champion of the West meeting in Atlanta. It's the top 2 teams, thank goodness, because that's what we've needed for a long, long time. There have been years where the best teams, the 2 best teams in the conference just happened to be, Alabama and LSU, or whatever it was. And, it was unfortunate that only one of them could win the SEC crown. So I thought that was a great piece to it. I do think that you're going to run into some scheduling conflicts. If this thing gets too big, I think 20 might be the breaking point there. You got room for, I think, maybe 2 more, 18 maybe. That seems like you could still kind of make it work. But again, as you're saying, the scheduling model is going to have to shift too, right? Like you're going to have to play 9 SEC games at the minimum. Yeah, I mean, look, the numbers are interesting. I wonder too, from a television perspective, like we were talking about this for a while in the first hour. When you're these guys over at ESPN, these schedule makers, right? Like, there's just so many games that you're having to fit in now, and I wonder what the breaking point is for TV, where it's just, that's too much. They can't really handle it. That's what I would want to know too. Like if you're the SEC, you've got to have those conversations with ESPN and ABC and just say, hey, what's too much? Like at what point do we start watering down the product? I think that's important too, right? Like you don't want to just add for the sake of adding. The other TV part too, I don't know if you and I have talked about this, but, I've had people in the TV world tell me, a very underrated part of expansion has to do with, cable rights and fees, right? And the SEC network and getting that as as part of a base package in certain states. And when you look at the opportunity that, presented itself this year, okay, now you've got, a lot of Texas under, covered. The SEC network goes to, most of Texas now. Now it's in Oklahoma. That's huge, right? So if you're going to expand, maybe ESPN wants to go into North Carolina now, Virginia. I could see that being the next move for them. I know a lot of people sort of look at it at face value and they just say, well, Clemson and Florida State, that makes the most amount of sense. 2 big brands, 2 massive football brands, but it's not as cut and dry as you might think.
It's TV fueled.
It is.
And it's market fueled.
It is, and that's where all of this money comes from. Okay, it comes from these massive television deals. TV gets what they want in most cases. I was talking to my buddy Andrew this morning, who works for CBS and ESPN, does freelance work for both of them. And I was like, it's interesting. I've never seen a team about this, the Carolina-Clemson matchup potentially being moved to Friday, Clemson saying no. I've never heard of a team telling TV no. right? Like,
Right.
I don't know. I can't name another instance where that's happened. And I'm wondering, like, does that set a precedent for teams saying, nah, we don't want to play at noon. We're good. We'd rather play at 7:30. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I always thought the TV kind of just set the agenda and said, hey, you're playing on Friday. That's
Because
it.
we tell you to.
We tell
Yes.
you to. And you're like, you can kick and you can scream and we hear you, but there's nothing that you can do about it. And
Right.
you better show up and play because that's the time you're playing. This may be the first time that I've ever heard of a team basically just saying, no, we're good.
Yeah.
And maybe, and I haven't read all of the contracts, so I don't know, like, you know, obviously you can't just refuse to play a noon game on a Saturday. I'm sure that there's a provision in there that states, you know, you can basically have the first right of refusal if a game is going to be moved from a Saturday to a Friday or Thursday. But I did find that interesting, Elijah, that, you know, a school said no to TV.
Absolutely. And one of the things, too, that the ACC did was, you know, in the article on Greenville Online, they mentioned, or in the email, the ACC kind of offered some concessions, like one or a couple of games that were ACC road games being ACC home games, or moving some things around in the future.
Sure.
To be able to make it kind of like a deal, and Clemson still turned it down, and it seemed like a pretty decent deal. But I think that's the first time too that I think maybe turning to add down some extra concessions to move a game to a Friday.
Yeah.
That's the first time I've definitely seen that too. And look, from a scheduling standpoint, the bigger you grow your conference, the more that's going to be coming into play. And Greg Sankey was actually asked about maybe some of the hurdles of running a 16-team conference as opposed to the traditional 14 that we've had for about the last 10 years.
It's been a lot of work, and we've had to stay grounded in who we are. The expectation was we're growing to 16, but we need to operate a team of 14, or excuse me, a league of 14 members. We obviously have a lot happening around us. We've talked ad nauseum about legal issues or state legislative issues or congressional issues. So we've had to operate, and then we've had to prepare. I think we've done a great job preparing across the board for our sports. When we launch volleyball season, Texas plays Texas A&M in a match right off the bat. You look at our 8-team decision, but the strength of what's happening, there's an F1 car here featuring the Georgia-Texas game in October. Only place on planet Earth where there'll be a college football game at the highest level and an F1 race happening. So that's pretty cool. And you've had to prepare for those moments, had to adapt. We're still in conversation about the future. We have a football schedule for 24-25. We're looking at 26 and beyond. At this university, they've had to prepare. Our teams have to prepare for visiting new cities. Oklahoma and Texas have to prepare for visiting new places that are just wonderful places in the Southeastern Conference, but intensely competitive. And so all of that's been what's in the work and the meaning and the preparation and the planning. And, you know, there'll be gaps or adjustments, and we'll have to adapt as we go a little bit as well.
He mentioned that Georgia-Texas game. That is the same weekend as an F1 race. And
that's cool.
Yeah, which is going to be pretty cool. But he's right. There's going to be some adjustments that you're going to need to do. And look, I think he's going to be paying a lot of attention to how the Big Ten balances their schedule out, how their season unfolds too, because I alluded to this in the first hour. Iowa doesn't play. They play one team in that top 5 of the Big Ten if you exclude Iowa.
Sure.
Right? They don't play Southern Cal. They don't play Oregon. They don't play Michigan. They don't play Penn State. Iowa necessarily isn't the most fun brand of football to watch. Do you like offensive football, Mike Gillespie?
I do.
You will not like watching Iowa. Kale, do you like watching offensive football?
Yes.
He says yes, which means you will not like watching Iowa football. And it is going to damage maybe some viewership if you have to put Iowa out there because they run through the schedule 10-2 again with their only Big Ten loss being Ohio State. But they hold teams to 7 points and they score 12, which is enough to win football games. And if they have to have that, I think that might be an unfortunate look for the Big Ten, but it might put them in a position they might not like as much because you can only do so much when you have 17 other teams in your conference.
Yeah, no, 100%. You know, it's interesting. We talk so much about the, you know, tougher strength of schedules, right, in the SEC. You know, who has the weakest? Do you know?
I think Missouri. Technically,
okay.
Missouri probably is the lucky ducky of all of these because if you look at their conference schedule, they have Vanderbilt at home, at A&M, home against Auburn. Still have to go at Alabama. They get Oklahoma at home, at South Carolina, at Mississippi State.
Sure.
Home against Arkansas. So in terms of the teams that are in their neighborhood, you really only have at A&M, at Alabama, and Oklahoma at home.
Yeah, and then you...
And I say only.
And then it's just like, then you look at Florida's November schedule, and it's Georgia, Texas, LSU, Ole Miss, and at Florida State.
It is Greg Sankey trying to kill the Florida Gators.
I mean, but again, to your point, right? Like, how do we even this out, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, no team, in my opinion, should have to play. Well, by the way, they've got a bye week before Georgia, but then, those 2 games before, actually 3 games. Let's just go through the 3 games before: UCF, Tennessee, and Kentucky.
Very difficult. Still very difficult.
Not a walk in the park. Yeah, not super easy. So, how do you, that's a huge challenge, right? Like, how do you balance, a team not going, just crazy overboard, and potentially costing people their jobs, right? Like, I mean, a lot of people are high on Florida's talent. They just say, you know what? There might not be a path to 6 wins here. But in any other schedule that they've had over the first 100 years of football, they may win 9 games with the talent that they've got this year. But with that schedule, they're not going to. Whereas a team like Missouri may win, 10 games because of that schedule. I mean, it's just, is that fair? No, it's not. And that's something that's got to be ironed out too.
Lamont Paris spoke yesterday, gave a little bit of an update on the Gamecocks basketball program with all the changes that they made. We'll hear what Lamont had to say as the postgame show rolls on. From the WIS Traffic Studios, I'm Elijah Campbell. The few accidents to get to you here that are causing some issues on the roadways this afternoon. We'll start with one on I-20 eastbound between US 601, exit 92, and exit 98. It's got the left lane blocked completely, so it's moving at a standstill at the moment. In Richland County, we have an accident on Hugie Street near Blossom Street here downtown, with one on I-26 eastbound at Bush River Road near exit 108A. And on 26 eastbound near St. Andrews Road near exit 106. We also have accidents on Shop Road near South Beltline Boulevard and on Trenham Road over at Highway 12 near Forest Drive. Continuing our discussion of Texas and Oklahoma entering the SEC. I'm Elijah Campbell. Mike Gillespie here with me. Interesting discussion about the 16-team league and how they're going to have to adjust here for a little bit. We'll get into that more in the drive around the SEC. A whole lot of stuff to get into with Texas and Oklahoma being a day old into the conference. But yesterday, Lamont Paris, head coach for the Gamecocks men's basketball team, gave kind of like a summer update a little bit. Team's going to look a whole lot different this year. Gave some updates on some players. He talked about even Taylon Cooper, who got to get an opportunity with the Orlando Magic Summer League team. Mike Gillespie, you watch a lot of Summer League basketball?
Used to when I was working my TV gig. Honestly, man, that's where we got most of our profile, if you will, from South Carolina and Clemson guys. So we'd roll on, NBA TV games, summer league games. And so, we'd have all the video file that we needed of,
yes,
like these guys coming through, summer league. And then, most of them would obviously, it just wouldn't pan out because it's obviously professional sports are tough.
Yes, very hard.
Tough to make a roster. So, but yeah, not anymore. Not too much.
Well, a guy that we're going to see in the Summer League next year, I feel like, because of how he progressed his freshman year at South Carolina, is Colin Murray Boyles. Mm-hmm. And Colin Murray Boyles broke out on the scene in a big way. Whenever 100%. He got in that starting lineup, he did not relinquish that spot at all. And I feel like for most of the season, he was your best player at many of those points. And this offseason, there's a couple things he's going to have to add to his game, especially if he's going to end up playing professional basketball. Lamont Paris talked about that a little bit in terms of the improvements that we can see from Colin Murray Boyles this year.
One thing, he's naturally unselfish. That's a great quality to have, but, I also am going to encourage him to be more aggressive, to generate offense for himself. So I think that's a real change. He's not going to do that just because I tell him. It's going to take some time for him to really evolve into a guy that is looking to generate offense for himself. We're going to need him to do some of that. And then a byproduct of that is once he gets good at that, teams will try to take that away, and he also can pass. His assist-to-turnover ratio was good last year, particularly for a young big. So I think that's the first thing. Two, then, is continuing to develop what my go-to will be and then what my counter will be off of that. I think that's the second part of his development that I think can happen this year. And then thirdly, things that can happen this year are continued a continued improvement on the confidence as a shooter for him. He's got really good touch, and I want him to explore that this summer and see what it really looks like, so that by the time November and December hits, we know what it looks like for him and we won't be out there guessing. So those are the areas I'm really looking forward to trying to help him grow as a player.
The jump shot's a big one, especially when you add somebody like Nick Pringle from Alabama, who got 100% of his field goals from the rim, at the rim within like 2 or 3 feet. in order to space the floor a little bit, he's got to be able to make teams respect his jumper. And that was the one thing I was waiting for when hearing that clip for the first time. I was like, he's going to get to shooting eventually. He's going to get to shooting eventually. But he did mention a lot of things about his game that I think are going to translate to the professional level one day. But if Colin Murray-Boyles does add like a three-point jumper to his arsenal and at least make teams have to respect it, I think that's going to open up a whole lot for the South Carolina offense next year.
Yeah, and remember, you're losing a guy named Michi Johnson, right?
Yep.
Who that was your most reliable three-point threat, right? Like that was your scoring threat. You lose a guy like Michi,
Leading
and
scorer.
somebody's got to step up, and it's got to be Colin Murray-Boyles. He's first on that list. I'm really interested, honestly, Elijah, to see this offense this year after, finishing, was it 350th or something in pace of play or whatever, 351st?
Yeah, they were down towards the bottom.
Yeah. So I mean, when you finish that low in pace of play, right? Like, I know Lamont wants to be extremely efficient.
351.
351. All right. Nailed it.
Very good.
So
Good pull.
I may have read that this morning. Anyway, so when Lamont wants to have, high efficiency basketball, right, you're going to slow it down a little bit more. The problem with that is, though, look at what happened against Oregon in the NCAA tournament, right? You get down by 10, and all of a sudden that number just seems like it's insurmountable because this is not a team that's going to score in, crazy waves. This team took its time. It had a very, high assist to turnover ratio, which is something that we saw from Bo Ryan, right? Like, I mean, that was Wisconsin basketball, right?
Hardcore
like
Bo Ryan.
Hardcore. I mean, and they used to practice passing for days on end, right? Like, that's something that Lamont Paris does too, very efficient basketball. I'm really interested, Elijah, to see how this offense changes. And I think it's going to be for the better. I think we're going to see an uptick. I think Lamont realizes that the pace of play has got to get up a little bit. Now, we're not saying it's going to be, crazy like, Tennessee, Florida, those teams that really pushed it a lot. Because, again, when you start to implement that, I remember when it happened under Frank. Frank Martin, used to play. His emphasis was defense, rebounding and take your time offensively. Well, all of a sudden, he tried to implement this like go offense, and turnovers went up, and so you got to be really careful in how you do it. But when you bring in guys like Nick Pringle, right? Like Alabama, I think, had the highest pace of play in the SEC. Okay, well, you're telling, right, your fan base, all right, this is kind of what we envision. We're going to push it a little bit when you bring in Cam Scott, right? Like a really fast guard. Like he's brilliant. I feel like we're going to see a little bit of a different offense this year. And, I think that sells well, right? Like
Certainly.
It looks better. And I also think that it leads to, better outcomes.
Yeah, I think we're not going to see them as low as 351. I don't think they'll be Alabama and Nate Oates in terms of just running up and down the floor, but I can see a little bit of an adjustment there. But the one thing I'm really excited about Colin Murray-Boyles' jump is watching him do what a lot of teams in college basketball are doing with their bigs, and that's making them as one of the primary playmakers. If you go back and watch BYU this past year, Mark Pope, who's now at Kentucky, did a really good job of recruiting and identifying a big man who was an elite passer. Ali Khalifa is an elite level passer. He's not going to be playing this year because of injury. Will be at Louisville next year, but is one of the better passers in all of college basketball, regardless of position. And they ran an offense completely through him. And when you do that through your center, you're spacing the floor a lot better. Or, one of the hardest things to guard in basketball is not just the pick and roll, but the inverted pick and roll where a big is handling the ball. And with Nick Pringle, who's a really good screener, a really good roller, you get two guys that are that big in a pick and roll action. If you're not turning the ball over, that is really hard to guard and game plan against. I think seeing Colin be kind of the fulcrum of the offense, the focal point, is going to be really fun to watch because I think it's going to be more modern in terms of how they look aesthetically. You see a lot of teams in college basketball doing that now. You're going to see a lot more teams do it because college sports and pro sports are copycat leagues. It's going to look different. I think it could look better. Even though you do lose a lot of versatility, and a lot of experience with B.J. Mack going and Talon Cooper leaving as well. We talked a lot of college football here in this hour. We'll continue that on the other side, including which games will be the most expensive to go to. We'll discuss the most costly college football matchups as the post-game show concludes hour number 2. Everything's expensive now, And when I say everything, I mean everything. But these SEC football games are more expensive than any other football game you're going to see in 2024. I'm Elijah Campbell. He's Mike Gillespie in for Jay Phillips. We're going to round out hour number 2 of the postgame show by going through a list that you sent me, Mike, from 24/7 Sports that I found fascinating in terms of just how expensive these SEC football games have gotten. Should we go from 10 down to 1?
Yeah.
Yeah. See, I'm a sucker for that.
Sure.
I like number 1 last, a reverse countdown. But we got number 10, Texas at Michigan, in terms of most expensive SEC football games. That sentence still sounds really odd and doesn't feel natural coming out of my mouth. But the cheapest ticket, I think for that one, was $476. The average is $954.
Unreal.
The average.
This
is just number 10.
Yeah.
Just number 10.
But it's week 2.
Yes, fair.
The longest winning streak in the nation on the line.
Yeah, that's
Michigan,
true. Michigan,
right?
Yep.
So I could see that. But I mean, it's impressive. That's only 10. That's only number 10.
Exactly. What's wild too is seeing $954 is the average ticket price in a building or a stadium rather, when it's at its fullest, is the 3rd largest city in Michigan.
Right.
So the demand for that is just off the wall.
How much money? I mean, like 110,000 people in the big house, and 900, and the average price is 954. I mean,
absolutely insane.
That's
they are making so much money. Speaking of a good money-making venture, one you are very familiar with, Florida and Georgia coming in at number 9, with the cheapest midfield ticket for Florida being a smidge over $1,000 with $1,062, and the cheapest midfield on the Georgia side being $1,357, so more expensive to sit on the Georgia side.
See, the key there is just to make friends with some Florida or Georgia students and just get them really, really drunk, and then they can't attend the game, and then you're like, hey, you can't waste the ticket. I got to have the ticket now, and then use the ticket and then go in.
Smart. Yep. So if I'm ever hanging out in Jacksonville on the last Saturday in October.
Yes. I say that having been on the other end of that. Having been on the student end of that.
On the student end of that and having to forfeit your ticket.
Yes.
It happens. And it happens to the best of us.
Yes.
Number 8. This is an interesting one.
This is an interesting matchup.
This kicks off the season. Notre Dame at Texas A&M. Your average ticket price, a smidge over $1,000 at $10.66. That is $1,066, not $10.66. A little more expensive than that, but that should be a really fun game. I'm really high on A&M, a lot higher than a lot of other people are.
Yeah, I mean two powerhouse brands. It's at A&M, so people have money to burn there. I mean that's just $1,066. I mean, am I old if I say that my rent used to be like half of this?
Yes. Yeah, I guess.
I mean, half of a ticket. That's insanity. Like, my rent used to be like $500 a month when I was in college. Like,
you're like, this is expensive. Yeah.
Like, what? And that doesn't even count, like, if you're a Notre Dame fan, like, you have to fly there, and you can't fly in. You can't fly into College Station, like, unless you're going to take a helicopter there. You got to fly into Houston. Then you got to drive there. It's not easy. That's not an easy trip.
Price out some Notre Dame fans, some of them. Number 7, as if a weekend in Vegas isn't costly enough.
Right.
LSU and Wisconsin on Labor Day weekend. I think that's the Monday. That's that Monday game?
Yeah, it is.
Sunday game?
Or Sunday.
Yeah.
I think it's a Sunday.
Not Saturday. Yeah. But LSU Wisconsin average ticket price, $1,088.
Yeah.
And surprised that this game's out of the top 5. Georgia at Alabama, $1,136.
Yeah, I wonder.
Outside the top 5. Didn't even crack the top 5.
I wonder how much Saban factors into that. Like, if he had come out and announced that this was his last year, like 2024,
Coach
right?
K style.
Yeah, right, exactly. Like, I'm sure that number would go up by a lot, but
skyrocket.
Yeah, but I mean, new coach. I don't know
if they're undefeated by that point.
Yeah,
I think we can see that number go up.
Yeah, for sure.
And I think I expect Georgia to probably be unbeaten by that point too, barring anything crazy. Number 5, Alabama at Tennessee at $1,232. Which, given what happened the last time these two teams met in Neyland, a lot of people are going to be a part of that. And Tennessee, good this year. I think they'll be better than last year, but they're not going to be anything what that 2022 team was.
Yeah, I was going to say, I don't know if you're going to have goalposts be torn down and thrown into a river this year.
Nope, I don't expect it. Even if you win, I don't think we're going to be tearing. They're going to be tearing down, goalposts and carrying that bad boy out of the stadium. Number 4, Texas, Oklahoma, $1,385 on average for a ticket to see their first game as SEC foes against each other.
Yeah, that's really interesting. But again, like you would expect that, right? Like that makes sense.
That makes a ton of sense.
A tough ticket to get every year.
Number 3, Georgia, Clemson in Atlanta for over $1,400 a ticket. Number 2, Texas at A&M for the first time in a long time at $1,500, and Georgia at Texas at number 1 over $2,176. Your average price.
And that is the premier matchup of the regular season or the regular college football season. So that makes sense. Over $2,000 pop.
Hour number 3 come up next.
Oh.
From the WIS Traffic Studios, I'm Elijah Campbell. The few accidents to report to you that are causing some issues on the roadway. We'll go ahead and start with the ones here in Richland County. Got one on 26 eastbound over at Brush River Road near exit 108A, and another one on 26 eastbound at St. Andrews Road over at exit 106. We also have an accident on Shop Road near South Beltline Boulevard, one on Shrenham Road at Highway 12 and Forest Drive, and one on Hugh G. Street near Blossom Street. In Lexington County, we only have one accident, or in Kershaw County, rather. That's on 20 eastbound, just past US 601 near exit 92. Five o'clock news time, as always, brought to you by our friends over at Integrated Media. Give you the latest from around the sports world this afternoon. Somewhat for an early day in July, it's a pretty busy news day, so we'll go ahead and start off with the latest. Just coming in about 30 minutes or so ago, former UConn legend and former Charlotte Hornets great, I know those aren't words we say a lot together, but Kemba Walker did announce his retirement. He's a four-time All-Star in the NBA, and this is a quote from Andrew Lopez's piece on ESPN. Quote, "I know I couldn't have made it to this point without my incredible support system around me. There are so many people to thank, my mom, dad, and entire family, my teammates who have become family, and the coaches who believed in me and brought out the best of me." End quote. So Kemba Walker hanging him up after a pretty successful career in the NBA, and somewhere Gary McGee and his ankles, the sole of his ankles, SOUL, can rest easy knowing that he no longer has to watch Kemba Walker play in the NBA or remind him of what he did to him at MSG in the Big East tournament in 2011.
Yeah, and I mean, that's a guy that's got to have his jersey retired in Charlotte. I mean, one of the best in franchise history, right? Like,
definitely.
I mean, has to go in the rafters ASAP.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, for Charlotte, hadn't had much to celebrate since they came back. The franchise came back since they were the Bobcats, and I mean, thinking about it now, that's probably the best player since the franchise was revived in Charlotte. I can't think of another one. As much as I want to put Adam Morrison up there in the what could have been category, in the NBA players that look like me category, I would love to put Adam Morrison up there, but Kemba Walker, four-time All-Star, officially retiring. And in college football news, this is pretty wild. Last year, the unexpected coaching change news came from Pat Fitzgerald in Northwestern after the hazing incident. This year, it is Utah State. Utah State tells football coach Blake Anderson of intent to fire. This is also from ESPN. Utah State has informed football coach Blake Anderson of its intent to fire him after an external investigation of alleged non-compliance of Title IX policies, quote, that require full and timely reporting of disclosures of sexual misconduct, including domestic violence. This was announced today, so the first firing of the season, and of course there's going to be a lot more released here in the coming weeks, I'm sure of it, but Utah State's Blake Anderson fired. Defensive coordinator Nate Dreeling has been named the interim coach for the 2024 season. So we already have our first head coaching firing. Blake Anderson, who's gone through a lot over the last few years. I know when he was at Arkansas State, he lost his wife to cancer, and then he lost his son to suicide when he was the coach at Utah State just a few years ago. There is got a pretty bad year so far. So he is out. It looks like he was 23-17 in 3 seasons at Utah State, and they actually won the Mountain West in 21. And the program itself actually has been doing really well. That's a sneaky good program over in Logan, Utah. So interesting to see exactly how they're going to be able to respond to that, and if they're going to be allowed to have some players into the transfer portal, because as most of you know, the transfer portal in football has closed. But there is the rule that if you do lose your coach, it does open for a small amount of time. I don't know exactly, with it being this late into the game, how much teams are going to be reaching out for certain players over at Utah State.
Sorry, my mic wasn't on. There we go. Yeah, no. I mean, that's awful, man. I mean, absolutely terrible. But again, the interim athletics director, I mean, she didn't really mince words. I mean, like, she goes, I mean, as leaders, we're responsible for ensuring allegations of USU policy violations are investigated. Today's actions are the result of a thorough external investigation, and we believe the evidence demands immediate action. So read between the lines. It's basically saying, yeah, he didn't follow through when these allegations were made. And if we know anything about, the current state of athletics, right? Like, I mean, you can't do that in general. Like, that's just terrible. As a human being, you can't do that. That's really awful. But now, you can't get away with this stuff. Like, this isn't the old boys club that you had, 30 years ago. Like, this is real stuff. This is serious stuff. And you have to, these coaches have to take it seriously. When you're a leader, of 100, 20-year-old kids, men,
yeah.
Like, it's, it's your responsibility to act accordingly. And, he didn't. So
that responsibility is on you, whether you want the responsibility or not. Terry and I were talking before we went on air for this show, and I think it's one thing that in almost every university with a FBS football program, the football coach is the most powerful person at the university. Yes, schools have presidents, they have deans and chancellors and all these fancy titles for people that hold really high positions of these universities. But the biggest moneymaker at each university is the football team.
Yeah.
And the football coach wields more power when it comes to the university. And that becomes with a really big responsibility.
Yeah.
And that's the thing. If something like that does come up to Blake Anderson, doesn't take the correct course of action, that it needs to be taken seriously. Because whether or not, you intend to do harm by not following through those procedures, you do just given your position and the nature of your position.
100%. I mean, who is the highest paid state employee?
It's the football coach every single year.
Right. I mean, Dabo Sweeney in South Carolina, right? I mean, yeah, so when you're commanding that kind of a salary, fair or unfair, right? You be the judge of that, but, you're held to a different standard than the rest. And you have to set that standard. You've got to be a model citizen. And, when it comes to sexual assault, there is no wiggle room there. When there are allegations made, you have got to report them immediately, and you've got to take those allegations very seriously. And it's great that we finally gotten to the point in society where we take this stuff very seriously, and we're not looking the other way, because that happened for so many years in college athletics, and I'm very thankful that we're now in a place in this world where people are getting kind of what they deserve.
Yeah, exactly. And details are definitely going to emerge as this kind of goes on too. I'm sure they'll definitely trickle out little bit by bit. But as of now, Blake Anderson has been relieved of his duties at Utah State, and the bad behavior isn't just resigned to the coaches. Oklahoma State running back Ollie Gordon was arrested on suspicion of DUI on Sunday morning, actually. The Oklahoma Highway Patrol did confirm to ESPN today the arrest. According to probable cause affidavit, troopers pulled Gordon over in the Oklahoma City area after he swerved his car into the adjacent lane twice and was caught speeding 17 miles per hour over the speed limit of 65. Jake Trotter from ESPN goes on to include in his report that during the stop, a trooper detected the odor of alcohol in the vehicle. Gordon admitted he had an open bottle of vodka and tequila, which according to the affidavit were found half empty. Gordon initially refused a sobriety test, and he was arrested on complaint of DUI, transport of an open container of alcohol, failure to maintain single-lane traffic, and speeding. And at the Cleveland County Jail, Gordon registered a blood alcohol level of 0.11 and 0.10. Like most states, Oklahoma's legal blood alcohol content limit for driving is 0.08%. So Ollie Gordon, who was today named as first team All Big 12, preseason All Big 12.
Best player in the Big 12.
Sir. I mean, I can't think of many that I would take over. He's a reigning Doak Walker Award winner, widely regarded as the best running back in the country. Got himself in a little bit of trouble.
Yeah, I don't really understand why these things happen. Well, like when you when you have such a bright future like that, like, I feel like one of the first things you need to do is just make sure that you have a best friend or something that, like, always is by your side, ready to, like, I don't know, drive you home when you're drunk, right? Yeah. Like, it's, like, maybe I'm just being a little too simplistic about it, but, like, and there are also things called Ubers that exist, you know, like, just don't do it. Like, and also, why are you traveling in a car with an open bottle of vodka and what was it? And tequila?
Yeah.
Like, I mean, don't get me wrong. I love me some. I love tequila, but, like, yes. You know, not opening it in a car. No. Like, that doesn't make any sense. It's just, these things just happen way too often. I will say, though, like, I hope he gets some of University of Georgia's attorneys to help him out there, because certainly they are well versed in this subject by this point.
Getting people out of that type of trouble, yes. or covering it up. Yeah, I mean, look, you're somebody like Ollie Gordon. You're a really important player on your team. You're also a public figure. And you're also a human being. That's just it's a really bad decision on his part, and he's going to have to deal with the consequences for a little bit. I think maybe a game or two suspensions probably will end up being handed out. Not really sure, but I don't think Oklahoma State, they've said they're aware of the incident, a spokesperson says, but they have not given any further comment. So that's another one to look at as the weeks go behind. And we're getting some news. What was
Taylor Edwards, who's served as South Carolina's Director of Player Personnel since 2021, leaving the Gamecocks football program, according to the Big Spur. So a really important member of Shane Beamer's recruiting staff. Looks like he's on the move, according to the Big Spur. So that's pretty big news.
That is, yeah, that's coming in just now, actually. I've not even seen that. Yeah, you notified me a little bit ago, but that is a pretty big departure from the coaching staff, especially when it comes to recruiting, which has been a little bit of a hotbed topic here recently with a lot of different movement. But I believe he is not the only one that is announced departures from South Carolina, because I think at the beginning of the show, was it Connor McCreary has entered his name into the transfer portal? Yeah, I've yet to get to that. There's some Gamecock transfer portal news as well. Connor McCreary, a relief pitcher for the Gamecocks, who I thought was one of their best arms in the bullpen in terms of velocity. And he had some ups and downs, but Connor McCreary, a solid bullpen pitcher, has entered his name into the transfer portal. So he will be, for all intents and purposes, a free agent. But just because somebody enters the transfer portal doesn't mean they can't come back. And lastly, just when you thought the NCAA was done with lawsuits, well, there's more. Certain basketball players have sued the NCAA over NIL use in March Madness promos. This comes from a Mark Schlabach report on ESPN, saying 16 former men's college basketball players, including Kansas stars Mario Chalmers and Sharon Collins, UConn guard Ryan Boatwright, and Arizona guard Jason Terry, Mavericks legend, have sued the NCAA in multiple conferences for the unauthorized use of their name, image, and likeness in March Madness highlights. Of course, in terms of March Madness highlights, Mario Chalmers has one of the most recognizable ones when he snatched the soul from Memphis fans during the national championship game in 2008 with his buzzer-beating three-pointer. Looks like defendants in the class action lawsuit, which was filed on Monday in the U.S. District Court in the Southern District of New York, also includes the Big East, Pac-12, rest in peace, Big 10, Big 12, SEC, ACC, and Turner Sports Interactive. So just because they got the House versus NCAA thing settled doesn't mean there's not going to be more, because if anything, I think that might have set more precedent.
100%.
Seeing lawsuits like this pop up.
Yes, and it's going to be very interesting to see how retroactive this is. So, with players, coming forward now from 2008, right? Like, what's the legal responsibility now from the NCAA to pay these guys? I mean, that's a whole nother topic for another day. But I mean, obviously so much has changed with the current athletes now getting that 22% of the media rights deals going directly to the athletes' pockets for the big four conferences. But, what about these guys, from 20 years ago that played? I mean, that is going to be a very interesting part of this. And, how soon will that bankrupt the NCAA? I give it maybe 5 years.
There's a really good chance. Yeah, there's a really good chance. And just when you thought the House versus NCAA might have settled some things. There's more. So that's one to definitely keep tabs on as the weeks go on. Yesterday, Mike Uva and I talked about Nick Emenwari's comments over at the Palmetto Autograph event talking about South Carolina's defense. Well, one of the biggest question marks for this football team going into 2024 is, can the special teams bounce back from an off year, and can they restore the Beamer ball brand? Kai Kroger, punter for the Gamecocks, spoke a little bit yesterday. We'll hear what he had to say and discuss further as the postgame show rolls on here in hour number 3. The craft beer card, well, it has never been more back. You can spend $30 a brewery at 12 different craft beer locations, which is music to my ears. It's a $360 value for only $79. If that interests you as much as it interests me, go to 1075thegame.com and click on Sweet Deals. Elijah Campbell here with Mike Gillespie filling in for Jay Phillips today. And yesterday, we had Mike Yuva in with me. We're talking Gamecock defense. Nick Emenwari spoke at the Palmetto Autograph event and was talking about how he thinks it could be a historical defense. And I, tend to agree that's going to be a really good defense. Maybe wouldn't use the word historical to describe it, but I think that will be the strength of the team. And most Shane Beamer coach teams have strengths of special teams.
Sure.
His dad, Frank Beamer at Virginia Tech, was where, the term Beamer ball came from. And last year, there's a little bit of a regression. They were one of the best special teams units in the country in 2022. Dropped off a little bit last year, but there's been some changes. Pete Lembo, no longer the special teams coordinator, head coach at Buffalo. In comes Joe DeCamillis, which might bring a new voice, a guy who's been in the NFL for 32 years. A world of experience. Kai Kroger talked a little bit yesterday at the Palmetto Autograph event about working with Joe DeCamillis and what they've been up to here this offseason.
Awesome, and just kind of learning more and more about him as he's been here. He's like the perfect coach that you'd want to have. Like you mentioned, his experience in the NFL is only going to help us develop in college and to prepare for that next level. His knowledge just on the position and the sport in general is like second to none, and he gives us so many different drills and things we can do that he's seen NFL guys do that benefit us both on the field and off the field.
It's going to be a different look. Pete Lembo is one of the best special teams minds in the country, and pairing him with Shane Beamer bore some pretty good results.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun.
It was. And this year, they're going to need that special teams to help them out a little bit, especially with the question marks you have on offense. But, Mike, the more you know about Joe DeCamillis, the more you hear about some of these players talk about him and the experience that he has, how confident would that make you that they're going to be able to kind of make a bounce back to kind of revive the Beamer Ball brand on that side of the football?
Yeah, I mean, I hope so. He's certainly one of the best special teams coordinators you could have brought in. I mean, the guy, just over 30 years of experience, speaks for, itself, was with the Broncos. I mean, his resume is impressive. The thing that I don't want to see is the creativity kind of diminished, right? Like, I don't want to go back to like boring special teams. I think, and I don't think it will, right? Because under Shane Beamer, I don't think you're ever going to have boring special teams.
It'll always be prioritized.
I think so, but that's first and foremost, right? Like what we saw under Pete Lembo. Let's continue to do more of that, right? The fake punts, Kai Kroger throwing a couple touchdown passes. I mean, like, come on, man. Like at one point, right? Like wasn't he like 7 for 7 with a couple touchdown passes? Yep. I mean, like that's just insane from a punter.
Crazy accuracy.
I love that. Yeah, for sure. I mean, you gotta love that. The designs in the kick game are super cool too. Being able to get your fastest players in space. One that stands out in my mind is the Texas A&M game. First play, kickoff return for a touchdown. That stuff really energizes a crowd. I want to see more of that. I think my biggest concern with special teams, obviously, with Mitch Jeter leaving, Mason Love, phenomenal kicker, and I guess by all accounts, he's going to be your starting kicker, but he's a freshman. This league is tough. Hopefully the offense doesn't regress. You've got a new quarterback in there too. How many times are we going to see this offense be stopped at say the 30, 40-yard line, forces, Shane Beamer into a really tough decision. Do they kick that field goal? Again, Mason Love is supposed to be a phenomenal kicker. Heard nothing but great things. You've also got Alex Herrera there, who's, it seems like he's, been on the team since the Reagan administration.
It's been there for a bit.
Yeah, and Kai Kroger, of course, same deal. Like you've got a bunch of good dudes around him. Hunter Rogers too, the long snapper. I mean, like these are guys who have played a lot of football for USC. Again, like that's what you want if you're a new a special teams coordinator, you want a group of guys who have been there for a while. Again, the biggest question mark is, at the kicking position, like, do they get the same amount of efficiency from that position at kicker that they've gotten over the last couple of years? And that's kind of to be determined, because you got a freshman that you're rolling out there next year.
Whether it's Mason Love or Alex Herrera, those two gentlemen have combined for 0 field goal attempts.
Right.
And Herrera has kicked some extra points in his career, but he has not attempted a field goal. The inexperience there is going to be a question mark, and their development over the summer and going into camp is going to be pretty vital, because, look, special teams can make or break your season in terms of winning the one-score games, right? I think my favorite example of all time is the 2010 San Diego Chargers, back when they were the number one, offense in terms of yards gained, number one defense in terms of yards against, and they still missed the playoffs because they lost 6 one-score games because they had one of the worst special teams units in the NFL. Not saying this Gamecock team is going to have the best offense in the SEC or the best defense, but the defense will keep you in a lot of games. And I look at the schedule and I see 5 games where I could see them being one-score outcomes. And if you're going to have 5 games of one-score outcomes, you can't go 1-4 in those. You can't go 0-5. You need to be 2-3, 3-2, because luck happens. You're not going to win all 5 of them. That's some pretty impressive luck. But you can make your own luck by having a really good special teams unit, and that's really the job that Joe DeCamillis has in front of him, is getting the special teams unit to, like you said, when the drive does stall out on the 35, or if it does stall out inside the red zone, and you just need 3 points, you don't need to go for it. You got to be able to have a unit that you can trust to put 3 points on the board. Or if you're Kai Kroger, who did see a net punt drop-off from 2022 to 2023,
for sure,
you got to be able to trust him to be able to pin your opponent deep and let your defense pin their ears back and get to a quarterback deep inside their own territory, because that can make or break you in certain games. It's just got to be better this year. And I think I'd put them up with like the quarterback situation and your wide receiver room in terms of the biggest question marks that you have surrounding your team.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because if Kai Kroger had a phenomenal season last year, like he did 2 years ago, right? Like, you're talking about him being one of the best punters this year. And I mean, he should be in that conversation, I think.
Certainly.
I think he is.
One down, you're not taking out.
Right. Yeah. No, of course. But it does raise some questions like, okay, well, why? Like, what happened last year to cause that? I mean, some punts were just shanked, like it didn't look great at times. So what happened there? I mean, they've got full confidence in him in 2024. And, it's nice to have your starting punter back from the last couple of years. You've got a guy in Hunter Rogers who's been Carolina's long snapper. He's been here for a long time, too. He certainly is familiar with, the staff. He's familiar with, his punter, too. But again, it's that, that kicking position. I feel good about Carolina's special teams just because of everything that they return. I mean, I think sometimes maybe we focus a little bit too much on, the kicking position. Mm-hmm. But again, like that's the position that's going to give you points. Of course, I say that, and, Kai Kroger has thrown a couple touchdowns in his career.
That is true.
But still,
he tests the theory.
But, if your offense struggles, can you get some points? I mean, that is got to be, the biggest question mark for USC special teams. And also, how does this special teams look? How different does it look? From going from one special teams coordinator to another. How much of a difference are we going to see? Are they going to be as aggressive as they were under Pete Lembo? Those are some big questions I have too.
And that's kind of the varying philosophies that we'll learn, as the season goes on between someone like Pete Lembo and Joe DeCamillis, who is going to have some pretty good autonomy over that room. And we talked a lot in the first hour of the show and a little bit in the second too about the new neighbors in the SEC with Oklahoma and Texas. When we hit up the drive around the SEC, both coaches, Steve Sarkisian and Brent Venables, talked about their teams and their new conferences. Hear what they had to say when the postgame show rolls on. From the WIS Traffic Studios, I'm Elijah Campbell. The few accidents here to get to you that are causing some issues on the roadways. Start here in Richland County. An accident on US 378 near I-77 is causing some mild traffic backup. Got another one on I-77 southbound. That's over at Blythewood Road, exit 27. Got one on Highway 1 at Augusta Road at North Grampian Hills Road, and one on Fort Jackson Boulevard near Divine Street. In Lexington County, we got 2 accidents that are active. One Sid Bickley Road at US 76, and one on Two Notch Road near Highway 6 at South Lake Drive, all causing some minor traffic backup. Drive around the SEC time, and yesterday was the first time that we took a drive around the SEC with Texas and Oklahoma as official members. And as that was going on, Steve Sarkisian and Brent Venables, the coaches for both teams, did join the SEC network. I think Brent Venables got the luxury of getting to hang out with Paul Feinbaum for a little bit, but they got to speak for the first time as SEC head coaches. And we'll go ahead and start off with Steve Sarkisian talking about his team going into the SEC and having to navigate a different type of schedule than they've had to in the last few years.
Well, August 31st at 2:30 in DKR, that's what stands out to me first. It's going to be warm, and we're going to need to be ready to play because they throw it all over the field, so I don't know how long that game's going to last, but need to be ready to play. And then obviously you get a heck of a challenge going to Ann Arbor in week 2, and you find out about some of the makeup of your team. Yeah. And then we know the challenge of who's going to come up from San Antonio with UTSA. They've got a great program. They've won a bunch of games. So the early slate of our schedule is going to be good for us because we're going to need to figure out who we are as we start getting into this SEC schedule down the road.
That's true. The schedule, like the SEC schedule, compared to some of their peers, it is not as bad. But Texas definitely doesn't lean into it as well as maybe some others do, because Colorado State, gimme, but at Michigan, before you even get into the SEC, is going to be tough.
That's a massive matchup. And I mean, like, wouldn't it be terrible? Wouldn't it be so bad for the SEC if Texas lost that game? Like, because it just takes so much momentum. I'm not saying that that's going to happen. I think Texas wins, but I mean, it just takes so much momentum away from the rest of the season. It's like when Alabama used to lose early. It's just not sort of the same vibe.
Like when Texas beat them last year, Alabama took a few weeks to get back on track before anyone took them seriously as a national title contender again.
100%. And then, all of a sudden Alabama beats Georgia in the SEC title game, and okay, they can play. They're back. Yeah. So, I mean, that would just take so much momentum. But you're right. Colorado State, that's not I think Texas wins pretty easily, but not, an easy game by any stretch. And then Texas and then game. Michigan back-to-back. What's that?
It's an FBS game.
Yeah.
A lot of other teams don't start off with FBS games.
Yeah, no, for sure. Yeah, absolutely. But, then it's like UTSA and Louisiana Monroe and Mississippi State. Yeah. Then Texas, Oklahoma.
And that's
a big one. But, yeah, they've got 3 nice little tune-ups before that Texas-Oklahoma game.
They do, and they're going to have to follow, for the first time in a while, they're going to have to follow a successful season. Last year, they were following up an 8-5 season. They were 5-7 in 2021, 7-3 in a COVID year. In 19, they were 8-5. I mean, it's been a long time since they've achieved this level of success. And it's the only time they've been to a college football playoff. So Sarkisian was asked about following the success of last year now that they're in a conference like the SEC.
I think that's the challenge, right? That level of consistency that's needed, not having to just get up for a game or two.
Right.
It's about playing a brand and a style of football consistently, and that starts in the offseason. And if there's anything you take from a Nick Saban and that level of discipline and consistency that he had for himself, that permeated throughout that entire building and that team. So you take some of those things from people that were your mentors, and that's clearly it. Complacency is the devil right now. We have got to stay driven, we got to stay focused, and we need to understand, hey, when we walk out of a tunnel with that helmet on, we're the target, right?
Yeah.
There's no more, we're the hunted. Well, we have to go hunt week in and week out as well.
Certainly not a better person to take in terms of lessons from than Nick Saban in that regard, considering the last decade of his time at Alabama. They were considered the hunted because they had such good success so early.
100%. Well, and I mean, I get sort of you don't want to become stale, right? And you always want to achieve more. I think it helps that they didn't win the national title last year, right? Yeah. Like, so they didn't get to the very top. I think it's harder, right? When you win the national title, all right, you've done it, right? Like, I've heard coaches talk about this all the time. It's like, they've never won, and then all of a sudden they win, right? And it's like, oh, this isn't what I thought it was going to be, and then they've got to sort of get back up and do it all over again. It's very hard. That's why it's so hard to obviously go back to back. But, I think Texas is probably more motivated than anybody else out there in college football because they fell one game short. But again, that is the challenge, right? You're not just a one-off. You're not a program that's just going to be good every 20 years now. Because that's kind of the way Texas was trending. I mean, like
they had some dark days.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't great. Not great. That's the challenge. But hey, when you've got a ton of Lamborghinis that you're showing off, or Ferraris, or whatever the heck that was, were they Lambos?
Cars with suicide doors on them, which I assume are not the cars that I have driven in my lifetime.
No,
yes, very much so.
Definitely not. When you're showing off a whole row of Lambos to recruits, then I'd say you're probably going to be okay for the next couple years. Just throwing that out there. I think
drowning in resources.
Be all right. Yeah. I don't think Sark is going to be hurting for recruits anytime soon. But, yeah, I mean, it's different, man. Look, going through an SEC slate, I know we've got the expanded playoff now, which helps. But, going through the SEC slate, much different than that, Big 12 slate. And I'm very curious to see what that final record is from Texas going into the playoff. I don't know if they're going to go undefeated. I think they have too many just massive matchups to just go. Yeah, to be able to go through, unscathed. Obviously that's the challenge for Sark is to get him back, and that's what the great programs do. I mean, I've heard it from coaches time and time again, right? Like to build a dynasty, right? It takes 10 years. 10 years of consistent winning, 10 years. And, Texas is nowhere near that, even though they consider themselves a dynasty somehow, but they're nowhere near that point.
And Oklahoma, pivoting to them, they're in a much different position where Texas coming in, bringing back a lot of players from that team that was really successful last year. Oklahoma is trotting out a quarterback in Jackson Arnold, who highly touted high school quarterback, was good enough in practice for them to tell Dylan Gabriel they're fine and that you can go off into the transfer portal and go to Oregon. And that's who Oklahoma's rolling into the SEC with. And Brent Venables and this Oklahoma team obviously think very highly of him. Venables was asked when he was on the Feinbaum show about freshman quarterback or sophomore quarterback Jackson Arnold.
Yeah, I love, again, where we're at. We've got tremendous experience coming back at the skill position. Certainly, Jackson, this will be his first full season. Jackson is as talented of a player as there is in college football. He's a winner. He's won his whole life. Smart guy, great instincts. He's got a tremendous skill set. He's got great toughness to him. He can run it. He can throw it. And again, this is a game of development. And so wherever he ended the season, we had a lot of opportunities to win that game. Wherever he ended the season last year in his first collegiate start, he'll be on another planet. And my expectation is wherever we start at the beginning of the year, he'll develop and get better. He's tough. He's got a great self-awareness to him. He's got all the traits that allow you to kind of have to go through it, both the good and the bad. And he responds to adversity, and just a tremendous leader. The players play hard for him.
And I think if he plays at his potential, you can see Oklahoma maybe have a 9-3 season with some massive wins. If there's a lot of that first-year starting struggles, you might see them at 7-5, 6-6, because their schedule is significantly tougher than what Texas drew in their first year.
But how nice is it as a quarterback under Brent Venables to know that defense probably isn't going to allow over like 20, right?
As a scoring defense, they've been fantastic.
I mean, you look at what Brent Venables did against the SEC at Clemson, right? I think they were 16-7 against the SEC maybe, and like not once did they allow, or maybe once, maybe it was against Alabama, they allowed more than 20 points.
It was rare. It was very rare team for scoring a lot.
Right, it never happened.
Team.
Right. So, like, if you're, I think one of the reasons why Oklahoma went with Venables is because, all right, well, you're making this transition to the SEC in a couple years, right? Like, here's a guy who's had so much. I feel like John Madden. Here's a guy. You've got you've got a coach who has, proven that he can beat, the best in the SEC. And, what a better guy to lead the program than Brent Venables. I mean, if you're any freshman quarterback out there, like, you got to feel really comfortable with a guy like that.
Absolutely. Having that defense behind you has to feel pretty good. We wrap up today's episode of the Postgame Show. The final segment coming up next. Final segment here of the post-game show. Shout out Mike Gillespie for filling in for Jay today, joining me for a little bit. Shout out Cale Wilson for sitting in here, keeping me company here behind the glass, and joining us for a little bit to talk about the South Carolina and Clemson game, almost getting moved to Black Friday, but not quite. But last night, for those who didn't watch it, the U.S. men's national team got knocked out of Copa America. And what we're going to talk about here is not necessarily the fact they got knocked out, but I think there's a pretty good life lesson and that we could learn from Greg Berhalter, the coach of the United States, in that loss. What made this loss so bad wasn't that they just lost to Uruguay. Uruguay is a really good team. But going into that game, they needed to, whatever Panama did with Bolivia, they had to do either the same or better. So if Panama and Bolivia tied, they could tie with Uruguay. They move on to the knockout stage, right? If Panama beat Bolivia and the United States beat Uruguay, then the United States moves on. They just had to match them with how the standings or the table was set. And Panama scores the first goal, as expected. Bolivia is really bad. For those who don't keep up with it, Bolivia is horrific. Panama is all right, but Panama did beat the United States, which is why they were in that advantageous position. Panama was up 1-0, but then later in the 70th minute of that game, Bolivia pulled off the unexpected, and that's score a goal. And they tied it at 1. Meanwhile, at Arrowhead in Kansas City, the United States and Uruguay were still tied at 0, meaning if this result stood, the United States were going to move on. Word quickly spread in that stadium that Bolivia scored to tie the game up. And once Greg Berhalter got word of it, he looked at his team in the field, was giving them ones, was putting his arms up and going, it's 1-1. It's 1-1. Talking about the Panama-Bolivia score, meaning that if the results hold, they win.
Right.
Or they move on. Even if they tied, they get to move on to the knockout stage. Would you like to guess, Mike Gillespie, what happened 30 seconds later?
They gave up a goal?
The United States gave up a goal. Yes. Albeit controversially, but they gave up a goal.
Should have been an offside.
Should have been offside. But they put their fate in the hand of an official because they fell asleep on a set piece. Uruguay scored, and no matter what happened, even if Bolivia kept it a 1-1 game against Panama, they wouldn't have moved on because they lost the game to Uruguay. Panama ended up winning 3-1. But a pretty good life lesson there with Greg Berhalter pretty much distracting his team with the score of the game in another state. A pretty good lesson to mind your own business and life will be gravy. Mind your own biscuits and life will be gravy. There you go. Mind your own business. Take care of what you have in front of you. You win the game. It doesn't matter. You take care of business in Arrowhead. Doesn't matter what Bolivia and Panama do. But you're too busy thinking about other things. Take your eye off the prize. And ultimately, you looked foolish for it.
It is pretty sad that we saw some of the worst soccer being played by our own country that hosts the World Cup in 2 years.
That's what makes this even more embarrassing.
It's so bad. And I think we've gotten to the point now, we've been at this point for a while, where you're not seeing the best of the best that America has to offer because there are kids that are better that can't afford to play in travel ball soccer leagues. And we have to do something about it. I don't know what the answer is there, but it's got to stop. It's got to stop with, like this American system trying to basically figure out how we can incorporate these kids who can't afford to play in these travel ball leagues and, get them some opportunities, because what you're seeing right now is just you're seeing the product of, wealthy families, playing on the field. Like that's it. And they might not be the best that America has, but it's they were the wealthiest.
Certainly.
And that isn't going to equal the results that you want, unfortunately.
Access is a really big thing, and that's maybe one of the reasons why the United States is behind in soccer. Like you see countries like Slovenia and Slovakia give up much better fights against better competition, and they're able to produce really good athletics, and they have like the population of Montana, right? Like there's no excuse. Panama shouldn't beat you, and I know that a pretty bad red card in that game, a stupid ejection, pretty much did America in. But like you said, the World Cup's coming here in 2026, and you've given absolutely no hope to people that are fans of your organization and U.S. men's national team soccer that you're going to put up any type of fight in the World Cup. Surprised to hear that Greg Berhalter hadn't been fired already. I think I would have fired him as soon as I saw him put up 2-1s to tell his team that Bolivia and Panama were tied in the middle of a game. I would have done it then and there. But there's just not a lot of optimism going into the World Cup, which makes these next couple weeks in terms of the future and the coaching pretty crucial.
No, 100%, man. And it's amazing to me that a country that is, again, hosting the World Cup in 2 years just fell completely flat on national television.
They did.
Terrible.
What a note to end on. But I'm Elijah Campbell. Mike, thank you for coming in again. Good stuff as always. We'll see you again tomorrow. Good evening.